YouTube. So I've got my other computer out in case someone asks a question on YouTube, and I can share it with the group.
You're so fancy.
Yeah. Visual on YouTube. So I've got my other computer out in case someone asks a question on YouTube, and I can share it with the group.
You're so fancy.
All right, I think we're live.
Other computer out in case someone asks a question on YouTube.
This is what I'm afraid of.
And I can share it with the group.
So fancy.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so I think that we're live. Let's see here. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Sweet, we'll see how this goes. I hope it works. If it doesn't work, if everyone out there on YouTube land cannot hear me, send me a message on Instagram and I'll play around with it. But if you are out there, hello and welcome to our first session with this fabulous group of coaches. We kind of have a loose schedule, but our plan is to just kind of chat and answer some questions that have been submitted and then see where the conversation goes. So let me do some quick intros here. My name is Carrie Lane. I am the throws coach at University of Wyoming. I've been coaching Division I college track for about 20 years. I'm really old. And I've also coached some high school and some high school basketball as well. So wide variety of coaching experience. Next to me is Sarah Stevens Walker. And Sarah was a thrower in Colorado, right, Sarah, in high school?
High school, yep.
Fort Collins, yep. And then went to Arizona State. She was a 15-time All-American, including an NCAA champion in the shot and the discus. Sarah, how many Hammer All-American titles did you earn?
I think I ended up with 3 Hammer All-Americans.
Yeah. Sarah scored 98 individual NCAA points. The record is 101, set by
Susie. I was going to say, I think a teammate of yours, Susie, say Lala.
Yeah, set by
Was it say Lala?
Mm-hmm.
Or Dawn Dumble, one of the two, but that doesn't.
I think it was say Lala.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the women's record, overall indoor and outdoor points record. So
Wow.
there you go. So Sarah's number 2 on that list. And now Sarah coaches in Buffalo, Wyoming. She's the co-owner, co-director, Sarah, of the 307 Throws Camp.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just take a sip of water.
Yes. This one right here.
Yes. So yeah, so that's Sarah. Next is Susie Powell. Susie is a 3-time Olympian. She held the American record in the discus for what, 5 or 6 years, Susie, total?
Yeah, something.
I think I counted you had 9 different records that you held, American records of some sort, age group records,
Yeah.
American high school record, American collegiate record, an incredibly storied career. Made World Championships final, would have made a couple more given the drug violations that came down the pipe. And now Susie is coaching at Modesto Junior College, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Cool. First year or second year?
First year.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, so a wealth of knowledge there. Was a 6-time All-American at UCLA.
Yeah.
And next is Lindsey Malone. Lindsey is our non-throws coach. She coaches the multi-events, so she does coach throwers, but definitely excited about her input in that she comes from a little bit different perspective. She has coached 10 school records at University of Colorado, correct?
I think so.
6, maybe 6. Hold on, I got my notes. And 6 school records, 10 NCAA finalists. That's what it is. Yeah, she's coached 5 U.S. national team members, and she's coached at 2 different world championships and 2 different Olympic games. So also a wealth of knowledge. And last, but certainly not least, and certainly not the shortest, is Dana Pounds-Lyon. Dana is a 2-time national champion in the javelin. Did not ever throw the javelin in high school. She was a shot discus thrower in high school. She competed for the U.S. Air Force Academy. She now coaches Kara Patterson, Kara Patterson Winger, one of our current American record holder in the javelin, and was a member of the 2007 World Champs team, coached Kara at the most recent World Champs, and is the throws coach and a strength coach at U.S. Air Force Academy. Sweet. All right, ladies. So let's get started here. The topic of this session is training and programming. So we got a lot of really good questions on programming for the throws, for different multi-event throwers, how to prioritize throwing, that kind of thing. So let's dive right in here. These are some questions that I got from a coach on Instagram. The first one is, as a coach, how do you know to keep trying with an athlete in a newer event rather than keep them more specialized? When is it time to move on or to keep working at other events? So I think what this coach is specifically referring to is when athletes get to college and they start trying the hammer and the javelin for the first time. How do you as a coach know, if it's going to work out and continue to kind of spread them out across 3 or 4 events, or when do you decide to specialize and narrow that down to their better events or whatever? Anybody want to take that on?
I think you have the best skill set on that one, Carrie.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I have a perspective. I think for me, it's a combination of researching the conference, because for me, that's always been my first priority is the athlete going to score events at the conference meet? While I do want the athlete to excel to the national level, we kind of have to cover our bases first with the conference meet. So if it looks like, technique is not perfect, but do they look like they're gonna throw far enough to score in the conference meet, then I will keep them with those newer events. As they get better and better, I don't know if you guys find this, but I find as they get better in one event, the other events have to drop off and you got to spend a little more time specializing. But by that point, the kid is older. There's maybe some younger contributors that I can kind of scrap, like a conference level event, and focus more on the other 2. I also rely kind of a lot on my coaching eye, especially with those 2 events, to know, do they kind of have a natural throwing arm that I can do something with in the javelin? Do they have some rotational ability in the hammer, or are they truly a linear person that doesn't really understand that give that you need to have in the hammer? So I might work with a college kid for 6 months to determine all right, one of these ain't gonna happen, and then I'll drop one and kind of move the other ones up the ladder. And then perhaps later on in the career, I may even drop another one as other teammates fill in that gap with the conference level, and that older teammate can specialize.
I think as a high school coach, I get this question a lot about we're going to buy a hammer because my son or daughter wants to throw in college and they need to know how to throw the hammer. And I tend to have the answer for high school kids. Just because you don't know how to throw the hammer now doesn't mean you can't still get recruited to throw in college. Mm-hmm. I typically ask, do you have somebody that can coach you? Do you have somebody that knows how to teach you how to throw the hammer right now, how to give you a very basic intro to the hammer or the javelin, rather than just picking it up and throwing it to tell a college coach, no, I can throw the hammer. This is how far I throw it. Because I believe college coaches want to get kids that either are introduced to it the right way or have no knowledge of it, and you can kind of mold them into that third event kid the way that you want to mold them. So that's always my advice to high school kids when I get that question about if we should learn how to throw another event outside of shot and disc is, do you actually have somebody that can teach it to you, or are you just picking it up for the fun of saying, oh, I've thrown the javelin or I've thrown the hammer, but you're going to end up getting hurt, or you're going to find yourself in a hole that a college coach is going to have to work really hard to get you out of that technical hole.
Yeah, I think like as a college coach, you know, if I'm recruiting a kid, especially now that we have more access to juniors, they'll kind of ask my advice, even on learning the spin versus sticking with the glide. But they'll ask like, should I learn the hammer or the javelin? And I'm always cautious to say, like, do you have, like what you said, Sarah, do you have a good coach who can actually, you don't have to be perfect at it, but who understands like a longer term plan and can give you like really good fundamentals. And if you don't have that, I typically say, don't worry about it.
Can I even take like a step back from that and like how to even determine if you want to work with somebody with the hammer or the javelin, right? Obviously in college, you want to introduce them and see what their skill set might be. But I think the best advice, and certainly really how I got recruited or even like kind of walked onto the track team, was having the softball background. And it's been pretty tried and true with me coaching the jab in the last 4 years. That Scott Irving taught me 180, 280. So throwing a softball, right? You can run up to it or you want to do. You can throw it 180 feet as a female or 280 feet as a male to see what type of like strength base and what kind of action their arm has. And so I think that's even like a step, you know, before identifying if you want to stick with an event is, you know, what does the arm, you know, what does it give you? Like, what is the capability of that athlete? And so having an understanding of throwing a softball and an understanding of throwing the javelin, being able to see if they can throw the ball with their body, not just a fast arm, because if they don't understand the components of ground force reaction to be able to get their body into the throw, I think that makes it even difficult, even if they can throw 180, and I say feet, 180 feet, 280 feet. So that's kind of the sweet spot on the men's and the women's numbers. 180, 280, usually you can kind of expect about 140 foot thrower on the jab side for the females and about 180, 190 for the men. So for those coaches that are watching, I think that that's kind of important. If you're looking to try to say, oh, here's a javelin with a discus and a shot putter, and they can't throw a ball for nothing, it's going to be really difficult for them to learn how to throw a stick as well. I'm sure that there's, you know, a lot of other outliers on the other side, but that was kind of a talent identifier for us.
Yeah.
Being able to walk on the track team, the academy.
Yeah, I actually used Scott's that exact guidelines with kids that want, you know, you get a lot of inquiries for walk-ons in college, and a lot of them want to throw the javelin because it looks cool, and maybe they played baseball or football in high school. And so I just have them do that test. I don't tell them like how far to, you know, what's a good mark or whatever. So hopefully these potential walk-ons are not listening to this, but then I just have them report back to me, and that at least gives me like an idea for like, okay, I'm going to go through the work of doing the paperwork to do a tryout or whatever. So yeah, that test that Scott administered or whatever is really pretty much tried and true.
So I have a question about that test. So is it a softball or a baseball or either one for either gender?
We need a
Softball for the women and then a baseball for the men?
no softball for both.
For both. Okay, interesting.
Or I'll take it. My top two guys this last year were 90-mile-an-hour pitchers that couldn't hit a strike zone. I said, well, my strike big, right? As high as you want. And so I'm teaching those guys how to throw a stick.
Yeah.
You can do a lot with an arm, that's for sure.
That's true.
I find that I don't have as much collegiate coaching experience as you guys all do, but certainly this year I saw a great bridge between volleyball players and javelin. And, it totally makes sense when you think about
Mm-hmm.
the movement, right? Movement patterns. So it was almost like I kind of felt bad for some of the other girls that had been practicing javelin all fall, and then the little volleyball girl comes out and, and goes 20 feet farther. So I
They
think
know how to make it right. I always tell them too, you want the back underspin on the volleyball. So speak their language, learn a little bit about baseball, softball, volleyball, and be able to speak their language about like finishing that, like through that. Cause like volleyball players will want to come over the top here where you want to send it behind and turn under the throw. So I think that's like really important. So anybody that's out there watching, I can't even tell if anybody's watching, but from like a throws coach's perspective, go hang out with the baseball coaches and see if they're cutting any 90-mile-an-hour pitchers and see if you can. I don't know. That's what I do. I got a good relationship with that baseball coach here. So.
Yep, softball outfielders too.
And then you get to another point. I don't make this all about javelin, but pitching is like all chest heavy throwing down and jab. And I think that throwing the jab is more like hitting a ball versus like pitching a ball. And so I prefer the outfielder's big arm and big bat as opposed to a pitcher. But if you have that strength in the arm and you can teach somebody to throw behind their legs and throw with that, the biggest thing is trying to get them to come in with their foot, not pitching off the mound and pushing back, but driving down and in.
Yeah. And then the hammer, I think, is a little more, I think it takes a little more of a coaching eye because it's a very complicated event. Like these other throws are all sort of related. And then you get the hammer in there. And so I think if you can determine some sort of test or like algorithm for like, can your thrower like sit back against something and then rotate, the faster you can determine if a thrower can do that, I think that gives you a leg up on like, yeah, let's keep at it with this kid, or no, this kid can't do that. I personally find that the more linear a kid is, like someone who's a really good glider, or they have trouble, like they're like a very linear discus thrower. I personally find it's harder for them to pick up the hammer. So I'll try it for a while because they can still do it. It's a skill they can still learn. But for a college kid, like I said, 6-8 months tops, if they aren't making progress that like another more rotational minded thrower is making, I tend to scrap it. Usually because they're pretty good athletes in other events, but not good enough that they don't need to practice more. So something's got to give. So I kind of use that as my delineator. Like, are they just way too linear to really like have that give to the hammer?
So Dana, I think you'll appreciate this story. The only time I ever threw javelin, I was an 8th grader, and it was like one of those US Junior National kind of, I think it was AAU maybe or something, and like at the state meet, and I'm qualified for regionals in shot and disc, and there's nobody entered in javelin. So like, what the heck? I'll go throw the javelin, right? Like, why not? I'm already going to the meet. And then get to regional, same thing. There's nobody entered in the javelin. So I'm like, well, sure. We're in a state where there's nobody that throws these events in high school or middle school. So what the heck? So I qualify for nationals, right? By default, because I was like the only one entered in the event, not because I was good at it. But I didn't have a javelin. So I practiced with a broomstick. And that's what I practiced with was a broomstick in 8th grade. And then I show up to nationals, and turns out community javelins, except for the like reigning national champion, you shouldn't take her javelin. And I have no idea who it was, but I picked the wrong javelin, and I was not well liked at that point. So that's my only javelin experience is throwing a broomstick.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good one. And then did you carry that practice on like at every other meet where it's supposed to be communal?
Yeah, right.
You just take the best.
Maybe when I got like good enough that I was like, oh, I could play like hit games with people now. If I take their shot put and warm up with it, I won't actually use it. But if I just warm up with it.
Yeah, totally.
About how someone like grabbed our implement and did something like outrageous with it, and you're like, what the?
All right, should we move on? Next question. This is a good one. What's a good ratio of days if you're a 4-event thrower or 3-event thrower, or you throw 2 events or just 1 event? So I guess ratio of days, maybe like during the week or for a month, or what, how do you guys program that? I'd like to hear what Lindsay thinks about something like that, because this is sort of down the road of the multi-eventer.
Yeah, so we get a little bit more specific just because we have 10 or 11, or if they have the auxiliary events as well to train for. So oftentimes it will be a certain set of throws that we actually get to have within the time period, because we still have to run, we still have to hurdle, we still have to jump. So oftentimes we'll have, we used to have every event was 2 days every year. And then we had a lot of just throws, not good throws. So then as soon as I pared it down to you get to throw javelin once a week, you have crossovers another day a week, you have full discus throws one day, you have turns another day. Then they took those very serious for the days they actually got in the ring or on the runway. And so we'll have an allotment depending on what time of the year it is, how hard we're throwing, how far we're throwing. And then they have a certain number that they have for that day, and that's it. So it's like if you go to the golfing range, you know, you get like 2 buckets, you're just hitting them anywhere, but you get like the last 3 balls, like, oh man, I got to make these great.
Right.
Well, they have every single throw has got to be great. And so it just turned into this great focus where we get a lot done in a smaller amount of time, and then we maintain health for all the other events.
Yeah.
So far, yeah.
So you have like someone who does 10 events, let's say, and and 3 of those events are throws. So they throw each event once a week tops.
We
fit in.
and shot more often in the fall, and then we take a break in November through February, and we practice more then. So we'll have some upticks of time just based off of what season we're in at that moment, and then facilities and all of that. So in the fall, we have a bunch of voluntary days where they can show up and kind of get more of just the work in. So you'll have one mandatory day, and then you'll have another voluntary day throughout the fall. The spring is more determined, I guess, on the weather and then the facilities. And, you know, if we're out there hurdling, depending on who's on the field or not. Fortunately, our other throws coach at CU works really well with me on scheduling facilities. So I have an inside contact.
That's convenient. Yeah. Yeah, but I like
He's
that.
also the meat director.
Yeah. Yeah, good. He's a good friend.
Yeah.
Is he gonna make a cameo in this, a cameo appearance? Or?
I wasn't sure if he was planning on that, so I don't know. Case?
He's allowed.
Did I get invited back?
You got invited.
Am I invited back?
Yep. This is
I'll hang out with the buffalo back here.
two-time Olympian Lindsey Malone.
I'll just be the wall art under in the background.
Give me my tech guy.
I'll just kind of creepily just hang out in the background somewhere.
Perfect.
Kind of come in and out.
I want to know if you guys share implements, or if there's like heptathlon, decathlon implements and throwers implements.
No, Casey's amazing at being really just open to everything. Like we come throw with his throwers because my guys want to throw with people that are great, and his guys probably don't want them to beat them. And same with on the girls' side. And then we have access to all of the implements. It's amazing because, you know, I want my decathletes, you're a thrower. When you get in that ring, you're a thrower. You don't think, well, I do all these other things. Like you need to take yourself seriously and take care of the implements. And then I always joke them that they have Casey to deal with if they mess it up anyhow. So
yeah.
Throw discuses
For
in.
sure.
they get demoted if they cage them. They get demoted to the ones that are practice discs.
Yeah.
I have the rest of the crowd besides Lindsay, Carrie, Susie, Sarah, do you guys coach your multi-eventers as well? Or do you have a multi-events coach in the throw?
Susie?
Sorry. This year I didn't really coach the multis too much, more so in women's jav than with the men's, and it had mostly to do with scheduling. My time was fairly limited this year, and so it didn't quite jive with the multi-eventers. So I didn't really get a chance to work with too many, but I did work with a couple of the women in jav and I almost said hammer and shot put. So yeah. And then I think, you know, when you're coach, kind of going back to the previous question, when you're coaching someone where that's not really their primary event or even, you know, not even close, just trying to teach the very, like minimum effective dose, right? Like what is the most effective piece or 3 pieces of information or technique they need to learn to just be good enough, you know? And so that would be my philosophy and approach coaching multis, at least at the junior college level.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't coached multis in the throws since I left UVA, like back in about 2011. I went to Nebraska and they had their own multis coach. And then here at Wyoming, actually, I have a volunteer coach for my throwers, and she works directly with the multis throwers. So she works with them in the shot disc and javelin, and they actually throw javelin with our javelin throwers as well. So, yeah, that's how we roll at Wyoming.
I think about half of my high school kids throwing is their 3rd or 4th event that they do, mostly because they're like, ooh, I kind of want to try it out, but I don't really think that I'm a thrower. So I'm still a jumper or I'm still a sprinter. So I'm going to do that. And then if I have extra time on Tuesday, I might like wander up to the throwing area. So I would say about half of them. What?
Is that like their scapegoat? Like, I'm a jumper, I'm a sprinter, but I'm gonna go. And then when they're
Yeah,
not good,
totally. On the days that they're like, so I was thinking I'm going to throw tomorrow with you the whole time. I'm like, that's funny because coach so-and-so said that that's the one day you have to be at the sprint workout. So there's that. So I work with lots of kids but it's kind of the same thing. Like Lindsey was saying, when I get those kids that are really good at other events, but also could be really good at discus because they're a tall boy with long arms and they're just like, they're a sophomore trying to figure things out and figure out what they really are good at. I kind of do the same thing. I'm like, look, I got to leave in 20 minutes. So we got to like get to work right now. You have 20 minutes to make it happen today. You missed out on the first hour and a half of practice because you were at your other events. So make the next 20 minutes count. So I would say I would have a similar approach to Lindsey that, there's kids that only take 8 or 10 throws twice a week sometimes because they're off doing other events and we just have to make it work with them. So
Sarah, what when you were throwing in college, I mean, you were very high level at 3 events. So can you give a rundown maybe of how a typical week looked for you in trying to fit all those events in? Maybe do a week in the fall and then a week in the spring when you're competing.
yeah, so I came into ASU, shout out to Dave Dumble, came into ASU under Dave, and he was young and kind of just getting his coaching career off the ground, had only been in it a few years, and so I didn't have hardly any exposure at all to hammer going into college. I had just thrown shot put and discus. And so I picked up the hammer and the weight my first year that I was there at ASU in the fall. And I was lucky enough, I got to redshirt that first year. So that took a whole lot of pressure off of figuring out how to be a hammer weight thrower and just really break down the technique and make sure I was doing it right. So I would say like into my sophomore and junior year, well, my redshirt freshman year, when I started competing for ASU, a typical week was that I would try to throw every event about 3 times. Depending on if there was an event that wasn't going as well, we might throw that a little bit more and really make sure that we got it in 3 times a week. Or, if there was an event that like discus one year, I just couldn't throw the discus one year. And it was like, it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter how hard I tried. It didn't matter how many times I watched film. It wasn't happening. And so rather than stressing myself out about that, Dave and I just like kind of pushed that one to the side and was like, we're just going to only do that once a week for a little while and not focus on it and forget about it. And don't stress yourself out on it because you're doing stuff in shot that's going to translate. And so, so I would say I was in the fall, definitely 2 events per day. Typically disc and hammer on opposite days. I was a rotator. So we had discus and shot put on opposite days being a rotator. And then hammer, I could throw on either one of those days. Once we got into the indoor season, like around December into January, I would pick up the weight. Usually right after Thanksgiving, we'd really start throwing the weight more instead of the hammer. And then same thing, discus, we kind of once a week, maybe twice a week through the indoor season, and really focused on shot put and weight through the indoor season. And then toward the end of the indoor season, we would start doing some drills with the hammer, not too much to mess with my weight technique at that point, but enough to be ready for the outdoor season when we got going. And then the beginning of our outdoor season was kind of the same way. We were back to every event twice a week, at least, with some of the events going 3 times a week to really amp up the training early on in, you know, the end of March into April. And then about the start of May, I would start to ease off. But then there was days that we would end up doing all 3 events in one day, because I would be going to track meets that I would have to throw all 3 events 2 hours apart. And so I would throw less. The number of throws was significantly lower per event, but we would try to go, you know, shot put for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then take a half an hour break and then jump right into the discus to replicate the 1 year Pac-10 baby, not a Pac-12 baby. Back in the Pac-10 days, yeah, woo woo. Back in the Pac-10 days, they actually changed the schedule and put discus, hammer, and shot put on the same day. And so we kind of panicked when we saw the schedule change. And it made sense to us. We were in the hunt for a Pac-10 championship, and we had Jessica Presley, and we had myself, and we had Tay Battle, and we had, you know, we had all these people that were going to compete for the top 3 spots in multiple events. And so we actually thought we were going to have to end up throwing all 3 events at Pac-10s on the same day one year. I want to say it was my junior year when Jessica was a senior at Stanford. And so we panicked a little bit, and then, you know, they adjusted the schedule and it worked out. So there was some degree of throwing 3 events one day or 2 days a week just to train for the mental side of having to switch events. But for the most part, it was 2 events per day, depending on what I needed the most work. And, you know, and then you get to NCs and you have multiple events. You have to qualify the first day and second day, and then multiple finals in the same day. So we really did try to replicate as much of that with the events as we were training. So.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
I think that takes, to be able to do that well, it takes a lot of artful coaching to kind of relate one event to the next. And like you said, you know, limit the throws like Lindsey was doing or Coach Dumbo was doing, so that they're high quality. But I think finding the common theme is what keeps, finding the common theme between each event, whether it's rotational shot to discus or discus to hammer, so that the athlete stays engaged and isn't just like neurologically fried.
I remember Dave a lot of times, right? Like in the fall, just do one more, take one more throw, do one more drill, and I was like, Dave, come on, like it's not going well today. Like, let me just stop. And then we would get to the spring and we're, you know, 2 weeks out of Pac-10s, and he's like, oh, that's it for the day. And I'm like, I took 8 fulls. What are you talking about? Like, we're not done. We're going to keep throwing. And so it took me a while to trust Dave's planning of how to be a multi-event thrower.
Yeah.
Because you physically feel like, oh, I can do more. I can keep going. I've only been at practice for an hour and 20 minutes. I could go for another hour, but Dave knew what we were doing in the weight room and had it planned out and understood where we were going. And as an athlete, like if there was anything that I could learn, it probably would have been that, right? Like hindsight's 2020. If I could go back to some of the conversations that I had with Dave, and I don't know if he's watching, but he probably would have just like, man, he could have wrung my neck some days. Cause it was just, I mean, it was a battle. And I was that athlete that was like, I wanted more. And I want to do better, and I want to be better, and let me keep throwing, and I don't want to stop. And so I think really having to trust the process, but getting to a point where you have success in multiple events, and all it takes is, you know, your first Pac-10s that it works, and you're like, aha, like that's what we're talking about here, is trusting what we're doing because it's going to happen when you need it to. So
Yeah, that's fair. One more thing I would add to that is what I tend to do as a coach. Usually I don't really ever have 4 event throwers. Maybe like, I guess Amber Campbell was one when I was a long time ago when she was in college and the conference was not very good. She actually threw all 4 events, but other than that, it's mostly 3 events. And I'll have kids do like, their cool down might be drills for the 3rd event. Like if I can't get all 3 events in, or it's like a meet week or whatever, I just make sure that they prioritize the 1st event. The 2nd event, usually they can get the same number of days in, but the 3rd event might have to take a back seat. And that's where I'll like make a cool down of like, hey, let's do some hammer turns for if that's your 3rd event. Let's just kind of touch on that for 10 minutes, shift your brain a little bit from shot discus world or any of those events. So I guess that's one addition I would make, is that, you know, sometimes you can just have a day where you're not throwing an implement, but you're at least getting some drills in and just kind of reminding the body how to move. That may be a good way if you're pressed for time.
when I was a junior, Lindsay, this will be a name you know for sure, Jackie Johnson.
Ah, amazing woman.
Right. I mean, everybody knows that name, but like I'm for sure in the multi world. So I was teammates with Jackie. She was a year older than me. And back to wanting to throw javelin, she scored 33 points at Pac-10s her senior year. But I always said it's not fair because she got to compete on 2 weekends. She got to compete the multi-weekend and she won. And then she got to come back and compete in 4 more events the next weekend. And so I mean, I kind of gave her a hard time about it and like teased her a little bit. Well, my senior year, I told Coach Kraft, Greg Kraft was our head coach, and Dave, I tried convincing them the only way I had a chance to break the Pac-10 scoring record was if I threw the javelin. And they and I kept telling them, I don't have to practice it. Like, just put me in the event, let me go to the meet. If I can pick up 3 points, there's a chance I could break the Pac-10 scoring record. They never let me. So apparently they thought I was going to practice with a broomstick again. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
She was phenomenal, and that's one of the things I love most about the Pac-12 is that we have the 2 weekends. Because when we were talking earlier about developing an athlete, if you're developing them to be a very good multi, they're going to score in open events. And so it's their chance to earn more points for the team and to help the team score and earn more scholarship. So I love having both weekends for Pac-12. I've been in other conferences kind of more smushed together, and you're within a multi doing your prelims for the first, or prelims for the long jump. And so that was a little more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should have thrown javelin. Just convince them that you'll do it left-handed or something.
I know. I was like, come on, just 1 throw. That's all I need. It just takes 1. Give me 1 throw.
All right. I want to get to this question because I think it's a good one. What is proper programming for throwing? Develop the athlete in order to throw. Develop the athlete in order to develop the throw, meaning make sure they can sprint well, make sure they're strong and that kind of thing. And then secondary to that is the throws, or get them in shape by throwing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think about that? High school perspective, JUCO, college?
I would start out by saying, again, high school level. So my job may be to prepare these athletes for what's going to happen when they go to college. Most of the time when you step into a good throws program, you are not what people might think is a quote unquote thrower, right? Like, you're expected to do very athletic things. And there is a demand to do very athletic things in the weight room, part of your conditioning on the track with sprints or running stadiums or whatever it might be. And so every camp that I work at, every high school team that I coach, I tell them, you are throwers, but you are athletes first. And so I put a big emphasis on them understanding why we warm up and how we warm up and the biomechanics of it, because at the end of the day, if you can't do basic, simple things like that, you can't do something with 4 different limbs at the same time and make them work together and then throw a big heavy object.
Mhm.
I tend to agree with Sarah. I think, especially if you're a high school athlete or coach, have your have your throwers play basketball in the winter. I think especially, certainly for high school, honestly, that's true. I mean,
Mine do.
this early specialization or the idea of it, let the, if you have influence in your high school athletes path, let them play other sports in the fall and the winter, and then focus on throwing in the springtime. And to Sarah's point, it's developing the athleticism to be a good thrower. I don't really believe throwing, I mean, you get in good throwing shape to some degree, but if the athlete has a deficiency somewhere in their system, whether it's I hate to use this word, but like core strength or shoulder stability or whatever, that isn't being addressed by throwing. So I think the better you can develop your athleticism, I would say throughout the entire spectrum from high school, college, and as an elite, you need to be continually developing that athleticism and letting the throw be the expression of the athleticism,
Mhm.
and let that drive the programming and the training. But that's one person's opinion.
It's
That's
great.
good.
opinion. I concur.
Too, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Snack
I
pack.
think too, like, I think if, sometimes as high school coaches, you might get a kid who comes to you because they're overweight, they're not very athletic, and their parents want them to do something, right? So they maybe aren't, they're not the best candidate for being on the basketball team and stuff like that. And maybe a high school coach says, well, if I can get that kid strong, then that gives them a chance, basically. So I think there's definitely room for strength, but I think we need to redefine our idea of what is strength. And teaching that kid how to sprint, even though they don't look like, they're not going to make the 4x1, they don't look like a good sprinter, but at least for the throws coach or the coach to teach some kind of sprint mechanics is going to make them more athletic, so that if they do throw in college or they move on or whatever, they are a more athletic and competent thrower. I also think there's a lack of emphasis with younger athletes on body weight exercises, multiplanar kind of stuff that you can't necessarily get with loaded exercises in the weight room. And I think that should be addressed. So even if you're just a throws coach, you have no control over the kid doing another sport, which is the ultimate way to train as an athlete. But if that kid doesn't do it, there are things that I think the throws coach should work to develop with the athlete other than just throwing. And for me, that comes in the form of teaching that kid how to sprint and doing just general strength, body weight type of stuff to allow that kid to handle their own body weight and move in a lot of different directions.
I would say too, the last 6 years that we've lived here in Wyoming, I've been coaching high school basketball and volleyball as well as track. And I'm like you guys, I see kids that think they need to specialize sooner than they actually do, or want to specialize, or a coach thinks so, or a parent, or whoever it is that's influencing that decision. But as a high school coach, your seasons are so short and there's only so much time. Your track season is 12 weeks. If you're lucky in Wyoming, it's actually more like probably 8 weeks with all the snow days and canceled meets. And so you want your kids more, you want your athletes more, you want them with you in the summertime or in the off season. But as a coach that coaches multiple sports, I probably have let go of that a lot quicker than somebody that only coaches one sport, because I see the value in what we're doing on the volleyball court in the fall, that my throwers actually getting better because of the things that we're doing with footwork and jumping and the biomechanics of that. So, I mean, you have to let go of the reins a little bit and trust that what they're learning and what they're developing athletically in their other sports is going to make them a better thrower at the end of the day. Those elite high school kids, in the top 10 or 15% that if you're lucky enough to have those kids at your high school, they could play 10 sports and they're still going to be elite because they're just really good athletes and they'll figure it out. And the kids that are in the bottom 10 or 15%, whether they do one sport or they do 10 sports, there's just a certain amount of genetics that goes along with it as well, that development only in your sport isn't going to be that drastic for them to suddenly be in the top 15% if they only focus on what you're trying to do. So it's hard to let go, but as a high school coach, you have to trust that there's value in kids playing other things, and they might love track more. They might love throwing more when they've been away from it for 3 or 4 months throughout the year and they get to come back to you.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, I prefer that. Talking to high school recruits and their coaches and everything, if they do all the sports they want to play, that makes my heart the happiest, because they're really having fun each season and they're looking forward to the next one, and they're developing all these other skills on screens than you're going to be doing in track and field, even with, say, their club coach in the summertime. Sometimes you have a team trying to win, and so they'll put people strictly relay runners when they can do all these other events. And it's just, you want to encourage them to like help develop the athlete on all the planes. So we also do a lot of the body weight work in the summertime. Everybody trains to be a sprinter. So it's just, I think for the system that I work with is it builds up equally over the entire time. So their mechanics and their speed and their strength and their development as an athlete in general is developing. I'm trying to keep it at the same pace. If you make them too strong, they're going to muscle every single throw. If things are firing inappropriately, they're not going to be able to hit the finish, right? So all of those things, you just try to continually monitor that, kind of growing at the same pace, so nothing overpowers something else and creates a terrible habit or kind of a rut that you can't get out of, or an injury. Injuries are the biggest thing that I have to deal with, as I'm sure everybody is, but when they have to be able to do 10 different events, injury is the biggest thing to caution. And often I use that with how many reps you can do and total that up over the week, the month, the year, the 5 years. And that's kind of how we stay within that healthy zone.
Yeah.
But I have a question. I want to be real with like all four of y'all. Like, how much, if at all, do you encourage or program even general athleticism? Like, I'm not talking like body weight stuff, non-throwing stuff. I'm saying, like, I'll be real. I let my kids / suggest that they go play basketball, or we go to like driving range, and like as a coach, for me, there's like recovery components there. There's also like athleticism components there. I want them to play spike ball. I want them to play basketball. I want them to play volleyball. I want them to play walk ball, which is the fat kids throwers way of playing football, where like the only rule is you cannot run, right? At least one foot has to be on the ground at all times. Like, I program this stuff in the off season because I want them to enjoy. Maybe it's because they're at the academy and they just need to have fun, but at the same time, I think it promotes athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear from the
health too. Good mental health, just like a break from it.
Dude, and if I wasn't so old and fat, I'd jump with them, and sometimes I do, but you know.
We did that a lot. We did a lot of stuff like that with Dave in the fall time, especially. He would, we'd go to the pool and we'd play games in the pool for part of our cardio, or we'd play beach volleyball and be having to jump around in the sand and do stuff like that. So in college, we did a lot of that. In high school, admittedly, I tell the kids to do that, but I can't work that necessarily into my plans because I get like this amount of time to make them be able to throw far. So it's like 0 almost. That's how much time I get. But I encourage them to do stuff all the time. And I'm a proponent of multi-sport kids, and through the summertime, and like, take a month off and don't see me. I don't want to see you. Go do your own thing. Give me a break, give you a break. So I definitely push that as a coach.
Let's be real. That's what we're doing with COVID right now. Like, go be an athlete. We've been limited. Like, we can't watch their videos. We can't comment on their videos. We can't, I mean, as a strength coach, I can give them weight workouts, but I got one kid that's like, I have a cinder block in a 32-pound backpack, right? Like, so I'm like, go be an athlete, be a kid. Remember, you're a D1 athlete, come back and we'll work, right? But
So are you guys saying you can't critique their film right now?
That's crazy.
We cannot.
Yep. It's really strange because we can have Zoom meetings every week, but you can't critique their video. And then as of this week, you can't talk technique at all. Nothing technical over the next 2 weeks because of finals.
You can't even like their post.
Yeah.
So
that's-
that Zoom video is getting canceled.
Wow. Whoa, that's wild.
To go back to
Yeah.
Dana's question about, what are we doing in our own programming? In my situation this year at the junior college, I would have to say it's similar to Sarah, where, it's just like high school continued, at least my first year where there's no real recruiting or anything. They're great kids, but throwing's not really the focus, and so I have to scramble just to get in the work that's necessary to develop a certain skill. So there hasn't been a ton of play, organized play in my program, but I will say, as a flashback, going back to UCLA, art definitely let us screw around and play grab ass, if you will. We would play like a flag football, basketball, if you can believe it, some other
Where you
games.
got it from.
And it was like everyone. It was like even like it, it didn't matter. So I've got some stories on David and
I will
where
all
John
yours.
Gardina got pushed by one of the underclassmen, and he grabbed the ball and he slapped it, and he's like, "I better take myself out of the game."
Yeah.
So I mean, to Dana's point, like it's just super fun too to get all these competitive people in a different venue, and also getting in some recovery work or athleticism development. So
It's fun to watch the guys try to play volleyball, because the girls are like, most of my women all played volleyball in high school and they love it. And so then you throw the guys into the mix and they're just kind of like gorillas, just kind of, jumping around. This year I tried something new where I gave them a bunch of props and I made them make their own game up. And I thought it would be super cool. It would allow them to be creative and all that. It was super lame. The games we made up were super lame. So we're just gonna go back to me making up the games and the rules. And
Standard schoolyard games.
yeah.
it always looks like your team's having so much fun. I mean, you're like dressing up and
Yeah.
playing games with these guys. I want to be on your team.
Yeah. I mean, we had a 6-week winter break. And so we brought our kids back. It was for like 4 weeks. So it was a month-long training camp, basically. So that's when we did a lot of like games for warm-ups and stuff like that. We still do that. Well, not now, but in season, we do that quite a bit as our warm-up, just like a spike ball game or a little volleyball pepper or something like that. But yeah.
I'm the only one that like fun. I think we played. I remember one day, like the first day I did this, and I was like the throws coach. I was like, down at the upper field at 1500, and they were like, and I was like I mastered the warm up, and I was like, you need to warm up your hips, and I was like doing this and this, like, all right, and I was like, you over here, like I did this whole deal, and then I like pulled out a football, and I was like, the only rule is you can't throw or you can't walk or run, and they were like, what? Like they didn't know what to do. They're like, bro, like super competitive, bunch of meat sticks, fantastic.
I think we probably had to condition David ASU to let us have more fun. And I would say that was compliments of Ryan Whiting and a Jason Lewis, and like ordering pizzas and having them delivered to the track after practice, and Ryan just like showing up in random stuff all the time. I mean, it was like, I think we had to condition Dave to get to a point where he kind of just like, all right, whatever, just work out, and then you guys can do whatever you need to do. But for sure, Dave didn't start out probably quite as relaxed as he was by the end of that series of throwers that he had there for 6 or 7 years.
I think it's awesome for team building too, and I think that's significant. Maybe it's because my first year and like bringing the throws together, but I thought that was like huge to just bring everybody on the same platform, and we're gonna have fun together and still have some competitiveness and some of that. So it was a lot of fun doing that as well.
Yeah, and it's still physical, it's like you could design a circuit and it could be really structured and regimented, or you just get them running around for 20 minutes and probably get the same effect. And they move differently and they breathe a little bit hard, and that's great. So yeah. I don't know if we answered that question, but yeah, we pretty much did.
I'm trying.
Yeah. It was like, how do you develop a thrower over the course of a season or 4 years or whatever? And
Be an athlete.
be an athlete. Yeah.
Athlete
Like,
first.
yeah. Like my priority for when I ask a recruit, like your qualities, their lifting numbers are so far down on my priority list. It's just not that important to me. If they have really big numbers, I know they're probably imbalanced and deficient in something else. That scares me a little bit. And if they have no numbers, then I know that, wow, they're throwing that far without really lifting. So they're doing all this other stuff that's making them athletic. So for me, like as a coach recruiting high school kids, I don't put a lot of stock in their lifting numbers at all.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I high school kids, like work with 13-year-olds to 18-year-olds and the whole gamut of them. I always try to relate it back to like their age, and they always say, well, I can't play football because then I'm going to miss out on 3 months of doing this, and I'm going to miss out on this. And they list all these reasons why they shouldn't be doing other sports and they shouldn't be going out for other teams that I know they're very good at. And so I would be doing them a disservice if I encouraged them to quit a sport that they were already good at to come and just throw. And so I always equate it back to their age and like remind them that, your first season throwing, if this is the first time you've touched an implement, this is like you're a baby from 0 to 3 months. And if you're out for the track season for 4 years, you're a 1-year-old. And when coaches are recruiting you, if they look at the amount of time that you've actually spent on just throwing, you're a 1-year-old that can barely walk. Like literally, you can barely walk in this event right now, in this sport, stepping into college versus the kid that is standing next to you and throwing the same distance, but it's the only thing they do for 10 months out of the year. They're a lot older than you, and their ceiling to be able to grow as an athlete probably it's a lot lower because they've had more exposure and they're reaching more of a peak for some of them if they specialized earlier. So
Yeah.
I remind my kids of that all the time.
So you're saying we're coaching a bunch of like 3-year-olds. That explains a lot.
I mean, you're welcome. I get them when they're 1,
You've got the terrible twos.
Susie, did you play a lot of games or what?
Did I what?
Did you play games or were you just discus only?
Oh, like when I was growing up or like coaching this year?
And then when you were an athlete?
Oh, no. I goofed around.
Well, we know.
Yeah.
I think those are stories she can't tell us when we're live on YouTube, maybe.
Yeah, that's what it is. No, I mean, I played
Off
basketball.
live, I want to hit ball.
And no, in fact, at UCLA, we had what we called Indoor Fridays. And that was when the rest of the team went to compete somewhere for indoors and the rest of us didn't. And David Dumble was often one of the culprits of Indoor Friday.
Oh, all right.
General tomfoolery and jackassery for a good 45 minutes prior to like any real work getting done. So
it's like it's in his roots. He just didn't let it come out for the first time.
It is totally Indoor Fridays, baby.
All right.
I think he was so polished.
Yeah, right.
All right, ladies. Well, I think we should wrap it up here. But yeah, that was a good talk. And thanks so much for everyone. By the way, I want to acknowledge the buffalo behind me. This is a piece of work by the one and only Lindsey Malone, who is, my screen should be below me. I don't know, maybe she's next to me. I don't know. But anyway, she's quite an artiste. And those buffalo behind you are your own as well, correct?
Yep, this one's in progress. He's almost finished. That one's finished.
Original too?
I got
What'd
it.
you say?
I love
Yeah, that's his moose.
I feel left out. Susie, what about you?
I know. I do I have to commission it or what?
What the heck?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
I have true supporters. It makes me so happy. The community's great.
All right, so we'll stop talking now. But yeah, so thanks for joining us. We are going to be back in your living room or on your computer on Wednesday. What are we talking about on Wednesday? High school stuff, high school throwers. Okay, so I had a lot of questions, and I know several of you guys did too, from high school throwers or high school coaches on the recruiting process and training and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of carryover of some stuff we talked about today, but it should be interesting, especially the recruiting stuff in the COVID-19 world. So stay tuned for that. And thanks to everyone who checked in with us today. And thanks to these lovely ladies for taking time out of your busy, busy schedules and making it happen.
Good to see your faces.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yes.
Carrie, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll see you guys on Wednesday. Bye.
Bye. Can we still hang out? Just kidding.
Let's hang
Yeah,
out.